You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. Yerasimos dropped his own intro yesterday, but I'm back this week. Need to reclaim the mic. Yerasimos, don't you dare do that again. I'm joking. Guys, thanks so much for listening. We're a podcast dedicated to truth seekers, getting out, all the necessary information that you're likely not going to hear in many other places. Interviewing absolute legends who are doing great work, and this week is absolutely no different with Boyack, the creator and author of the Tuttle Twins, in the house. These are incredible children's books, which I highly recommend you guys get out to any kids that you're connected to, either children, nephews, nieces in your life. Highly important information. Right before we bring Connor on, there's 50% worth of spots still left for this round of Rise Above the Herd. It's locked at 15 students. We begin July 10. So if you're interested, please head to riseabovetheherd.co. Quickly, I'd like to give a shout out to David, who left a testimonial from the last round of Rise Above the Herd. He says Rise Above the Herd was the ultimate consolidation of all Joel and Yerasimos' work over the past few years. It's like all the best parts of everything they stand for and teach on the podcast rolled into 8 intensive weeks full of excitement, challenges, life-changing realizations, and friendships to do it alongside with. The before and after comparison of myself exceeded my expectations, and I now feel so aligned with my unique journey, so focused on what's truly important, and I feel clear about where I'm headed in life. Rise Above the Herd cuts through all the confusing fluff that's out there and gets straight to the truth of what it is that we're here to do. You will not regret this investment in yourself. I certainly don't. David, thank you so much for those beautiful words, brother. It was an absolute pleasure and an honor. So if anyone's interested in joining us for the next round of transformations, we begin July 10, and you can apply at riseabovetheherd.co. Without any further ado, here is the man, Connor Boyack. Enjoy this episode. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. We have the honor of hosting today the incredible Connor Boyack. He's a public speaker, TV show producer, and author of 36 books. Best known for creating the Tuttle Twins books, a children's series introducing young readers to economic, political, and civic principles, with over 4 million books sold. He's also the founder and president of the Libertas Institute, an award-winning free market think tank and educational organization responsible for changing over 100 laws across a wide range of issues, including drug policy, privacy, transparency, property rights, free association, criminal justice, and parental rights. Connor, thanks for being here for the truth.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, for sure, man. Us too. One way we always like to kick this off, particularly with first-time guests, is we want to get into your personal story a little bit. Like, what were some of the major rites of passages and I guess the primary catalyzing moments in your life that I guess led you down this particular path?
There's one major one that stands out. I grew up in a household that wasn't too, political. My mom was on our city council for about 10 years. I grew up in San Diego, California. And so, we would talk here and there about current events, but it wasn't like a big focus. It wasn't really on my radar. I went to college. I became a web developer, so I would create websites for a living. And then got married. And one day I'm watching TV with my wife, and this was 2007, and the news was showing this event that had happened in Texas, where law enforcement had raided this compound, they called it, which was called Yearning for Zion. It was these fundamentalist polygamists who were kind of very sheltered, and someone had called a hotline and provided a tip that, like, hey, there's abuse happening. And so, like, all these law enforcement agencies swooped in, and they went in with, guns a-blazing and tanks and all this kind of stuff. This wasn't Waco. This wasn't, any of the other similar things. But they go in, and then they removed over 400 kids from their parents because the allegation was that there was some kind of child abuse. As it turns out, that tip was false. It was like a crank call, but that's what led all the law enforcement in there. They take these kids away from their moms, and so I'm watching this on TV, and I don't know what's what, and I don't, but I was horrified by what I saw. I reacted very poorly to it because I understood, at least at the time, that like when the government comes after you, they should come after the individual who's suspected of a crime, and not go after like everyone in your whole neighborhood or everyone who belongs to your church or your entire extended family. Like it's supposed to be specific. And so when I saw these kids ripped away, I had read this report of the foster care system and how much abuse there is in the foster care system. So they're taking these kids away from their moms, you know, and putting them in this system that's full of all, you know, drug abuse and sexual abuse and everything. So anyways, I'm just a web developer and doing some online marketing. And so I'm like, you know what, I'm going to start a petition, an online petition. That was kind of new in 2007. No one was, you know, doing that too much. And it got like over 1,000 signatures. I ended up on the news, did all these interviews. I was writing congressmen. All these people were flooding the comments saying, thank you for standing up. Thank you for, you know, speaking out. And, you know, I wasn't connected to them. I don't share their views on, you know, polygamy or anything like that. But they were kind of a marginalized group that few people wanted to stand up for, and their rights were being violated. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I just stood up and said, hey, that's wrong, you know, and knocked that off. But the gratitude that I got, and the praise, and the you know, just the love and support was so life changing for me. And I realized, oh my gosh, like I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed kind of taking my talents, my technological kind of background, and applying it to this context. In this case, it was just a petition, but like, hey, I have some talents that I can use. Maybe I can use them in ways I've never thought of before to actually make a difference and help other people. And so that to me was like the spark that lit a fire in my life of like, how else can I serve and support other people who are being marginalized or who are being, you know, hurt, or their government is persecuting them? How can I help them too? And I've now built a whole career around that and an organization doing just that.
It's incredible how, like, you know, you can just go along your regular everyday life, then a single decision can just activate something that was dormant, which, you know, radically changes the entire trajectory of what we're living for. Absolutely incredible, man. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the little things in life that have the biggest impact, I feel like. And there's obviously many other influences and pivot points, but that was one of the big ones. And I like what you said, actually. Just as I reflect on my own life, I think I like to plan things out, and I think I'm in control, and I think that I'm trying to like forecast into the future, and I know where I'm going. But you're right. Like, I think we have to be open to, you know, adapting to constantly changing circumstances, which frankly is tiring. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, can we have some stability and just have status quo and not have to constantly be reevaluating everything and responding to market changes or business, you know, issues or customers? And but such is life. And so I try to cultivate an attitude of like, you know, what's tomorrow going to bring? I might do something totally different than I've ever done before. And so far that served me well. So I'm glad you called that out. I agree.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there too, because it's important, I think, to have goals and have a vision, but at the same time, you don't want to be so rigid that you don't have the ability to be flexible and to be open for the miracles that show up in your life, that allow you to pivot, allow you to change. My story is pretty wild in terms of making decisions, and one thing leads to the next thing that leads to the next thing. But before you know it, you're sitting here and you're having a conversation with two people on Zoom, and it's pretty amazing what came before. But I want to ask you this question. I don't know if you want to share anything that led up before that, but what inspired the Tuttle Twins? Like, what inspired you to create these characters and to want to educate children about liberty, about freedom, about entrepreneurship, about capitalism, etc.?
Yeah. So for those briefly who don't know, the Tuttle Twins is a series of kids' books and now a cartoon that teach the ideas of freedom and a free society to the rising generation. And this got started 10 years ago, decade ago. I was running this think tank, changing these laws, because again, I had kind of built a career now around changing laws and trying to go help people. And I have two kids, but at the time they were 5 and 3. My 5-year-old was almost turning 6. And, I'd come home at the end of the day and say, tell me what you did. And he's like, I watched this cartoon, or I played with so-and-so, whatever. But he would start to reciprocate the question. Dad, what did you do today? I was like, like, how do I tell my kid something more than like, I typed on a computer all day, or, I had phone calls. Like, I wanted to meaningfully convey to him that what I was doing. But how do you talk to, you know, a 5-year-old about fighting eminent domain down at the city hall and like what that even is? Or how do you talk to these, you know, little kids about combating socialism or fighting for free markets or whatever? So I did what any dad in my shoes would have done when presented with that scenario. And I went to Amazon and I typed, you know, children's books that teach about property rights or free markets. And there was nothing. And at the time, I'd been kind of kicking around this idea with a buddy of mine who had kids and big freedom fan as well. And we were teasing on this idea. What would it be like to do a children's book? Would there be a market for that? Would that be something that we'd want to team up together and do? And so we decided to just do a book. We had no vision for the future. We had no idea if it would catch on. We just said, if we only ever do this one book just for fun, what would we want to create together for our own kids that would, you know, be super meaningful? So we created that book, The Tuttle Twins Learn About the Law. It's based off of The Law by Frédéric Bastiat, a French economist, really fun short essay. And because that essay was influential for both of us in our own kind of intellectual development and worldview, developing our worldview. So we created the book. Sure enough, a lot of people bought it and started asking us, when's the next one coming out? We're like, yeah, we'll get right on that. And before we knew it, a series was born, and now we sold 5 million copies, and it's just gone bonanzas.
Yeah, man. I've got the law myself. You know, I've got 2 daughters. They really enjoy it. They're onto the little TV series now that you got going.
Great.
Kudos to you on that as well. Like for you, but what about like in your own personal journey? Like, were you always freedom minded? Were you always liberty minded? How were these principles cultivated in you originally?
So, as I said, I didn't grow up in a super political household. My parents would talk about some of this stuff, but they were probably just generic conservative Republicans. But a big influence in my life was actually my grandfather. When I went to college, I went to college near where he lived, and so we would, you know, hang out for dinner, with me and my grandparents and other relatives, and he would start feeding me articles of like speeches that had been given or booklets like the law, you know, and he would introduce me to a lot of this material. And so I kind of got a good foundation through him to a lot of these ideas and philosophy and economics and so forth. So he was kind of giving me a foundation. And then kind of the rocket ship that propelled me off the foundation was in 2000, I want to say 2006. I was invited to this local library for a screening of a new film that had just come out, might have been 2005, by the late Aaron Rousseau, and it was called America, Freedom to Fascism. And Rousseau was chronicling from his perspective how these like lofty ideals of freedom that the classical liberal founding fathers fought for have degraded in America, and that we've fallen very far from that kind of lofty ideal that they had fought for. So he does this documentary. I'm sitting in a library with like, I don't know, 12 other people on a, you know, Saturday afternoon watching this documentary. And there was this guy in the documentary who made just a lot of sense. Like listening to him, I was like, that guy, I need to learn more from that guy, because he's just like throwing truth bombs, you know. And I just like, give me more of that. Well, it was Congressman Ron Paul. And so I did what many have done since that time, and I Googled Ron Paul and went down that rabbit hole and read all his, you know, speeches, watched all the videos. This was before the presidential campaigns, in 2008 and 12. And so just a lot of his congressional stuff, his books that he recommended, right? Because he had kind of a recommended reading list. And so I would go start reading those. And so that was like my red pill moment, was Aaron Rousseau having that documentary, introducing me to Ron Paul, and that just opened up the whole world of, you know, Austrian economics and free markets and individual freedom. And so Grandpa gave me a foundation, but man, Ron Paul was kind of lit the fire under me.
That's a great documentary. I watched it when it came out. But he also, I think he also directed one of my favorite comedies of all time, Trading Places, if I'm not mistaken. But
I didn't know that.
I think so.
Oh wow!
And Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy from like the 80s. I'm pretty sure he may have been a producer on that.
Cool.
I have to double check. Anyways. Throw that little bit of trivia in there.
To be confirmed. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Because you bring the grandfather character back in the first book, right? The law.
Yeah. So we've got the neighbor. His name is Fred, and he's actually modeled or inspired by Frederick Bastiat, who is the author of that essay that ours was inspired by. So the twins have grandparents, and they kind of come in later in the series. But in that first book, it is their neighbor Fred, who's an older fellow, and so he's kind of the wise old neighbor that could be like my grandpa was to me, that he could kind of teach them and expose the twins to a lot of stuff. And the twins, like I have a boy and a girl. They're not twins. They're 2 years apart, a little less than 2 years apart. But in the books, the Tuttle Twins characters are modeled after kind of the personalities of my own kids. And so it's been fun. My kids love like beta testing the book. I'll be working on a draft and they'll read through it. Although my son recently, now he doesn't want to anymore. He just wants to wait for the final product. But in the past, he's always kind of helped edit and like, oh, what about changing this? Or what if you do that? And it's fun. It's a family project. We all love it. And it's a good time.
Connor, let me ask you the most important question. Are you paying him for his consultation and editing? I'm just want to double check on that.
Okay. Here's the way to answer that question. So for years, I have used my kids in our marketing, especially in the early days when we got started. So I would have these cute little kids, memorizing their lines and just giving the marketing commercial. And I would film it and I edited it and everything, right? Because I didn't have a team at the time. And so these views were so cute. They got millions of views across social media. And one day we're on family vacation in Lake Tahoe. And my kids, every few weeks or whatever, they'd say, how many views is it at now? And, and so I told them whatever it was, 4 million views or something at the time. And my wife says, man, they've sold a lot of books for you. Too bad you aren't giving them a royalty. And my son turns to me and says, Dad, what's a royalty? And I'm like, So we talked about royalties, and then we talked about contract negotiation and how now it's a lesson to negotiate better up front when you have leverage or demand a renegotiation of your contract. So no, I pay them a very modest, minimal amount for their efforts. My boy, for example, I taught him how to edit audio, and now he's our podcast editor. So we have a podcast called The Way the World Works, and they're little 15-minute episodes just for like mom and the kids in the car, just plant little seeds for discussion. And so we do 3 a week on our podcast. And so my boy, I pay him not only to edit it, but as part of editing it, he has to listen to the entire thing so that he can like take out any bad, like the excuse that I use is that, oh, I want you to edit, any coughs but really like he's now listening to the entire thing and getting educated. So it's kind of a devious thing on my part, but he's learning a skill and I'm paying him to do it. And he loves it. So yeah, again, it's like a family affair. Early on, the kids would help me pack books back when we would do it at my house before we now have a warehouse where we employ like 20 or 30 people just packing books all day. So it's definitely a family project.
Cool, man. How old is he now? If you don't mind me asking.
So my oldest just turned 14, and then my daughter's 12. So they're now moving into the teen books. So we have 2 different series of books for teens, a fiction series and a nonfiction series. And so they're kind of moving into that upper bracket.
Cool.
Yeah. Why do you think your message and your books, like, why do you think they've become so popular?
Well, we were having kind of slow growth in the early years. And then 2020 was massively explosive growth. Just to give you a little numerical snapshot, from the time we started in 2014 through 2019, so about 5-6 years, we sold, what was it? It's about 750,000 books cumulative, right? Across those years, that's how many total books we had sold, about 750,000. In 2020 alone, we sold 1.3 million books. It's almost double what we had done, combined. And so I think there were many reasons for that, but primarily with all the crap happening in 2020, number one, everyone became a homeschooler, at least for a few weeks when the school shut down.
Mhm.
And so everyone's like, crap, how do I teach my kids? What do I teach my kids? And so there's a lot of like recommendations between parents. Oh, get this, check into that, do that. So there was a lot of word of mouth that really spread like wildfire. And then, just the authoritarianism of the government's response to COVID and shutting down, not only the schools, but stores and churches and beaches and parks and everything else. I think a lot of people have this visceral reaction of like, what happened to my country?
Yeah.
I thought we lived in the land of the free, or I thought that we had these basic rights and that we were a free society, and all of a sudden the government can do this because people get scared. So there were a lot of parents who kind of got red pilled and woken up to the reality of the state that we live in. And so from that perspective, a lot of parents were like, crap, I've been resting on my laurels. I've taken these things for granted. I don't want my kids, to grow up in a world that has less freedom than I did. So what do we need to do? Right. And so there we were to raise our hand and say, hey, come check us out. The final thing I'll mention why I think we exploded was right when the lockdowns first really heated up. We launched a sale called the Lockdown Learning Sale. And it was like this bundle of books you could get and all these bonuses and stuff. And just like the right time, because everyone's like a buzz about lockdowns. And then we did that sale, and that sale just like blew up. So just kind of, for me, it speaks to like that concept of when preparation meets opportunity. Like we had been doing this for a while and we were kind of prepared for something like this. And then the opportunity unfortunately arose, and we were able to leverage it and reach a lot of people and just keep growing. So it's been, the word of mouth continues to spread. People love the books from a wide range of political spectrum, and just really seeing that we need to foster critical thinking in our kids, and that this is an effective way to do it because the schools aren't doing it well, the textbooks don't do it, social media certainly doesn't do it. And I think a lot of parents, in fact, there was a massive survey that came out a few months ago, global survey, and they were asking parents to rank like their priorities for K through 12 education. What do you want to get out of this for your kids? And all kinds of factors, right? I want them to get a good job in the future. I want them to be able to get into a good college or whatever. But the top two reasons across, I think it was like 50,000 parents surveyed. So this was a very statistically significant survey. Top two reasons. Number one was I want my kids to learn practical skills. And number two was I want my kids to develop critical thinking. Well, the schools do neither of those. And so I think a lot of parents recognize, crap, I need to do something different. I can't just keep sending my kid to school and, think that they'll turn out all right. And so we've been able to attract a lot of families who I think just, again, have kind of red pilled and realized they need to do something different.
Yeah, man. And I want to dive into the education system in a little bit. But first, quickly, I want to ask you, like, as someone that had, I guess, as you say, been red pilled to the tentacles of fascism or socialism starting to take root in America, were you surprised by the reaction that took place in 2020 by governments? Did you see it coming to that degree? Where were you at that moment in time?
So I wrote a book in 2014 for just an adult general nonfiction book called Feardom: How Politicians Exploit Your Emotions and What You Can Do to Stop Them. And that book talks about many things, but it was primarily focused on a post 9/11 world, talking about how, Americans got scared. And so we surrendered all these freedoms in the name of safety.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have neither safety nor freedom anymore. And so I talked a lot about how this historical trend, I mean, you can go look at World War II or World War I or the Vietnam War, all these global events, big events that have happened. This is a trend that has happened for a long time, but I focused a little bit more on kind of the 9/11, just because it was a recent, fairly recent example to have in people's minds by way of reference. And when I wrote the book, I had this sad realization that the book was never going to go out of style or become irrelevant, right? That it was like this evergreen topic that no matter the issue, we're going to go through this again, and people are going to get scared, and they're going to surrender their freedoms because they're told that that's necessary in order to, have this new government program that will keep us safe. So I was kind of keen to that trend, before COVID happened. And so very quick, like, of course, when something new comes out like that, like you lack information. You're like, oh, wow, is this a big threat? Is this a problem? Is this as bad as they say it is? And we're all in that position of ignorance. But for me, at least, pretty quickly, I was kind of like, I bet they're overblowing this. I bet they don't know what they're talking about. I bet that we don't actually need to take all the crazy precautions that everyone is telling us to. So I was kind of wise to it, but it reminds me of there's that quote: "Those who don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it."
Mm-hmm.
But then the corollary to that is those who do learn from the past are still condemned to repeat it because everyone else fails to learn and forces you to go through and relive the mistakes of the past. So yay, I knew, differently, and, but still I just had to sit here and suffer through all this stuff because everyone else was, falling prey to their fears again. And honestly, like the question that keeps me up at night is whether COVID was enough to jar enough people awake so that we don't do this again anytime soon. Have enough people learned that the government lies and that there's all these, incentives and corruption and reasons why the government acted the way they did and that they were often wrong and all the rest, right? Like, have enough people realize that so that they're on guard next time anything remotely similar to this happens? And I'd like to think that that's the case, but I'm ultimately a pessimist on this particular issue, where I feel like whatever the next incident that happens is, it's going to be just different enough or scary enough, or that people are going to fail to apply the learning from the COVID experience to this other circumstance. And so we're just going to go through this constant cycle as we have in the past. And so that saddens me because I don't want to keep, like Aaron Russo's documentary, degrading from freedom to fascism. Like I'd love to turn the tide around, but we live in a society of people who are more scared and want to be kept safe and coddled rather than, Thomas Jefferson has this quote where he says, "Timid men prefer the calm of despotism to the tempestuous sea of liberty." Right? Freedom is a, shaky ground, like, what we were talking about earlier, right? Having to pivot from one thing, like always having to be on guard and adapt and change. And so the sea is tempestuous. Despotism is calm. It's like a prison cell. You have a schedule, you have a certain regimen, you eat at predictable times, you're locked away, kept safe, right? Like, so yay, you have a calm life, but
sounds like the womb.
Yes. Yeah. So I fear that we're in a society where too many people, to use Thomas Jefferson's term, are timid, and they would prefer to be told that, getting our bodies scanned at the airport is necessary to stop terrorism so that we can fly safe. And we buy into these lies because we get scared as a society, and that becomes the new normal, the new baseline, where everyone just takes for granted that's all been the way it's always been done. And it's just a sad fact of human nature, I suppose.
Yeah, man. I mean, you can't have freedom without responsibility, and unfortunately, we have a populace that seems to be avert to responsibility. I guess the question now is, why is that? The first thing that pops to my mind, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the testimony of Yuri Bezmenov to G.
No.
Edward Griffin. Talking
G.
about
Edward Griffin, yeah.
Yeah, so G. Edward Griffin interviewed Yuri Bezmenov back in the early 80s, I believe. And Yuri discusses the demoralization of America through the education system, talking about infiltration of, different, I guess, political threats. And over time, the American populace would be demoralized enough to ultimately come to hate the founding principles of America. So when I say that, what comes up for you in terms of how our education system has shifted to end up being, I guess, in a way, in antithesis to what America was built upon?
So I was speaking to a parents group recently and about education, schools, and what's happening. And a mom raised her hand and said she vented about all these problems, the critical race theory and the 1619 project and gender ideology and all these things. And she used the phrase, "The school system is broken." And I paused. I was like, I respectfully disagree, because to be broken, it has to be inconsistent with what its original design was.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back and you look at the architects of the modern school system in America and beyond, but chiefly in America, uh, the design that they implemented, I'm talking about Horace Mann and John Dewey, these secular humanists, atheists, their God was government. John Dewey literally has this quote where he calls teachers in school prophets of the one true God. But he was an atheist. His God was government. It was the state. And he saw teachers as the frontline ambassadors for the state, not to inspire kids to be individualist, critical thinking, entrepreneurial, ruggedly independent overachievers in life. No, quite the opposite. To cultivate a citizenry of subservient citizens who know how to follow orders, who know how to get in line, who can do what they're told. And that was the goal. That was the design, to create a collectivist approach to shape society. They were very open about this too. I mean, Horace Mann, he's the first Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, where they introduced compulsory schooling, and so he was, late 1800s, early reformer in this effort. And he has this quote where he says, "Men are like cast iron, children are like wax." Right? Men are set in their ways; they're difficult to bend. You can't mold them differently, but children are like wax. You can mold them any which way you want. Let's go after the kids, which is what all dictators and despots have always done throughout history. They go after the rising generation. So anyways, back to this lady. I said, look, I don't think the school system is broken. I think all the problems that you're seeing are outgrowths of the very design that was created. And so if you don't like that, then get the heck out of that system if that's not producing the results that you want. I'm a product of what I call the public fool system. I attended government schools and in the 80s and 90s in California. And gosh, it's been 40 years. It was 1983 when the Ronald Reagan administration put together a group called the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They spent 18 months going across the country, talking to parents, teachers, principals, reviewing curriculum, trying to assess how is education going in the United States. At the conclusion of their 18-month study, they put together a report. They called it an open letter to the American people. The title of the report was "A Nation at Risk." And in the chief part, the core part of the report, they said that America's educational foundations were being overwhelmed by a rising tide of mediocrity. And that if a foreign government, they said, if a foreign government had attempted to impose upon America the very mediocre educational standards and performance we now have, we might have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, they said, we've allowed this to happen to ourselves. That was in 1983, just over 40 years ago. And so when I talk about education and I talk about schools, I'll often share that story and I'll say, raise your hand, anyone in the audience who thinks that schools are substantially superior to even just 40 years ago. And to date, when I've asked this question, no one has been brave enough to raise their hand that they think things are amazingly better. Because you look even just at test scores, let alone all kinds of other metrics, and things are flat, if not, degraded. There's probably, I'm sure, some anomalous kind of marginal areas of improvement, and things have gotten better. But on the whole, things are much worse. And so when I put my tinfoil hat on, I think to myself, if I'm a ruler, if I'm part of the elite that gets to kind of shape and influence society, do I want a citizenry of independent, critically minded, entrepreneurial, rugged individualists? Well, of course not. You can't govern people like that. They challenge you. They call you out. They know history and therefore don't want to repeat it. Those are not the people who are easily governed, right? And so if you want to govern people, you want a dumbed down populace. You want people who don't know their history, who are, it's why a report came out just a couple of weeks ago, 13% of eighth graders are proficient in American history. 13, only 13% across the country. And so I look at that and I think it's appalling. But I think there's a lot of people who look at that and are content with that because they know that those people will become, serfs and drones and, people to be taxed to supply, funding to the elite and those in control for their programs. And they won't know enough to challenge them. They don't know their rights. Like if you don't know what your rights are, how do you know when they're being encroached upon? If you don't know between you and your neighbor where the property line is, and your neighbor continues to advance and lay out his trash and his lawn chair and go over onto what you think is your property, but if you don't know where the property line actually is, how do you point anywhere and say this far and no further? Right? If you don't know what your rights are, you can't defend them. And so people who are historically illiterate and civically apathetic and products of this government school system are just mediocre and they're malleable like the wax that Horace Mann talked about. So that's why I think those of us who care about freedom and we're fighting in the courts and at the Capitol and trying to change all these laws, at best we're putting band-aids on these gangrenous wounds, right? Like there's these underlying diseases in our society that if we don't treat those, all these little problems and issues are just outgrowths of this core disease that we have. And so for me, it always ultimately boils down to education. I don't think we're going to save our country at the Capitol. I don't think we're going to save our country in the courtroom. If our country is to be saved, I think it's at the dinner table where families are talking about the ideas that matter, the way the world works, the current events and hot topics of the day, helping develop critical thinking in their children. That's why we do what we do at the Tuttle Twins, is because I think that's the ultimate solve for our society, is to rebuild social fabric and support families and supporting the rising generation. Otherwise, we've already lost and we're just throwing band-aids on gangrenous wounds, and I ain't got time for that.
Mic drop right there.
Yeah,
I mean,
man.
that was incredible, man. And I totally agree with you. And even just relating back to what Joel mentioned in terms of the interview with Yuri Bezmenov, he was a ex-KGB defector, and the interview was in 1984. And he talked about this idea of ideological subversion. And even though the Soviet Union fell, these ideologies are still there. They're still present. And so how do they infiltrate the minds? And they infiltrate over generations of getting into the university system, getting into the media system, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get to the point where we are now. And I couldn't agree more in regards to this shift needs to happen, not deeply at the political level, but at the individual level, with the person, with the child, with the parent, and how they're shifting themselves and how they're raising the next generation.
Yeah,
Agreed.
for sure. I mean, you talk about not being able to point to the property line when, someone is encroaching on one's property. Well, yeah, it starts at the property line with the house, but very quickly, as we've seen over the last 3 years, it comes to, our own property, the personal property, our own bodies themselves. Those lines have now become blurred for many individuals as well. What actually belongs to me, And I think many people are in fact are in a place where they're actually questioning whether they have like any right to decide over their own body. And it's surely it's very scary to witness. And like we kind of touched upon earlier, it's my hope too that enough people have kind of been shaken up from the events of the last 3 years to come to the point where this may not have to happen to such an extent again. But time will tell for sure. So
Yeah, but
yeah,
no.
go Connor.
No, I was just going to say, and again, this is where education comes into play. Either an education is a system is empowering individuals or not, and disempowering them and keeping them in a victimhood state where they're looking externally for people to take care of their basic needs and tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I don't feel like that circumstance that you just described is just this unintentional, spontaneous, organic thing that just happens to be happening in society. I believe that there are people who are cultivating that and fomenting that, who desire these outcomes. So I'm working on a book right now, probably going to target this towards teenagers. It's not a Tuttle Twins book, just another book I'm going to write, and it's called Mind Wars.
Mm.
And the entire book is about psychological warfare and what it looks like, and propaganda, and how our minds are influenced, and how, you know, our brains can be hijacked by other people and manipulated. And you know, Edward Bernays to me is like a classic study here, right? For those who don't know, who are listening, he's the double nephew of Sigmund Freud. So he's got direct access to this kind of pioneer in research and understanding how our thoughts and dreams and behaviors work. And Bernays ends up working for the Committee on Public Information, which was a federal propaganda machine trying to persuade Americans to support World War I. You know, hilarious. Woodrow Wilson gets, you know, elected. Oh, he kept us out of war. You know, reelected. That was the campaign, and then immediately tries to get America into war. And Bernays working in this propaganda machine, learning these tips and tools, writes his book titled Propaganda. He's now known as the father of propaganda and the father of public relations for a variety of reasons we could go into. But what I've always found fascinating, like he's got the book is an amazing read for any listeners who have not read it. It's a short book, but it's eye-opening that over a century ago, here's this guy talking about how the true ruling power in any society is not what you think it is, right? That there are people who are pulling the strings that you cannot see or understand, and yet they are the true ruling power of society. It is they, he said, who pull the strings that govern the affairs, that our daily actions and thoughts are shaped by people that we don't even know exist. And if he said that over a century ago in a very technologically simple era, you know, how have those types of similar people been empowered today to shape narratives and control messages in people's minds? And so at the end of the day, it all boils down to this scenario. Any parent would be horrified if their child was sent off to some far off battlefield of you know, some theater of war, and not provided body armor or a weapon or knowledge of who the enemy is and how the enemy is going to attack, where they're going to advance, what the rules of engagement are, right? Like as a parent, if your child were that soldier that was ill-equipped for the fight, you'd be ticked off, because you know that your child will immediately become a casualty in that war if they're not adequately prepared and trained and armored to defend themselves. And so when I share this with parents, I say, is it any more acceptable for your child to become an intellectual casualty, an ideological casualty? Like, psychological warfare is very much happening. And if you don't realize that your child's mind is ground zero, is the battlefield, right? If you've not given them armor, if you've not helped them understand who the enemy is and how the enemy attacks, what your weapon of attack is to defend yourself, you know, what the rules are, like, if you don't talk to your kids about this stuff, they're already a casualty. And what good are you? You know, and so we got to wake up to the fact that these influences and forces do exist. We got to understand how they operate, who they are, how, you know, what they look like, and empower our children to be shielded from that and understand it, so that they can resist and fight back and not become a casualty, but in fact become an asset and help other people around them, and you know, be part of the team to fight back. Yeah. And so I'm trying to take my time with this book, because I don't want it to just be a reaction to COVID, or I don't want it to be I want it to be an evergreen book that has lots of examples throughout history of how this plays out. So it'll probably come out later this year or next year. But it's a topic I've been thinking through a lot, because I feel like too few people realize that we are in a mind war. And they assume the best of intentions from the schools or the media. Maybe they're a little critical of the media, or they say they don't trust these people, and yet they continue to believe whatever garbage that they pump out. And it's that whole quote, you know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Like, I didn't learn the first time, and people aren't learning. And so the goal that I'm trying to think through how best to wake more people up and help them realize that we are in a mind war.
Oh man, it's good goosebump moments for me, man, during that monologue. Like, the terrain of war has changed, you know, and many people haven't just realized that yet, you know. But you're right, it's psychological now. I'm not sure if you were aware, but I think it's either the grandson or the great nephew of Bernays is now one of the founders of Netflix.
Yeah,
Really?
the founder of Netflix, Mark Randolph, is Bernays' great nephew, I believe.
Wow, I did not know
So,
that.
it always makes me think of George Carlin's quote, like, it's one big club and you ain't in it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think of I always chuckle at this story that here's Joseph Goebbels, the
Yep.
Nazi minister of propaganda, overseeing all the Nazi propaganda. And what does he do to learn how to do all of his operations? He reads Edward Bernays.
Yeah.
Bernays had written this book on influencing, crystallizing public opinion, and how to shape narratives. And so Bernays says that when he found out that Goebbels was using his material, that he was horrified, in part because Bernays was a Jew, and so here's the Nazis using this knowledge and these tactics to do everything that they did. It just showed, like, one of the best books that I recommend is a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini. And he talks about the psychology of persuasion and various ways to persuade people. And he says at the beginning of the book, like, these are tools. It's like a gun. You can use a gun to go murder people, or you can use it to defend yourself. You can use a tool, an inanimate object, for good and for bad. And so the tools of persuasion can similarly be used for good or for bad. And so he, of course, advocates, like, hey, learn these principles of persuasion, not only so that you can resist being affected by other people and you can see through what they're trying to do, but so that you can use them in positive ways. And so that's something I think a lot about too, is like, the stuff that Bernays was talking about, like, there are nefarious people who are using this for their purposes, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be reading from the same playbook and trying to persuade people to, support freedom and be more independent and have personal responsibility. We got to be employing similar tactics of propaganda. Yeah. We used to get accused at Tuttle Twins of being, propaganda for kids. And I would resist that. I would always get defensive when people, oh, no, we're not. Propaganda is when the teacher's like shutting the door so that, parents and the principal don't know what's going on, and they're just like pushing their agenda on these unsuspecting kids. That's not what we do. We go straight to the parents. We're, providing them eyes wide open, this material. So I get defensive. Now I embrace the term. I'm like, it's absolutely propaganda. Everything is propaganda.
Yeah.
We are just propagating information. That's all propaganda ultimately is. And if you don't recognize that others are propagating their perspectives and their narratives at you, then why aren't you competing for your own child's mind and heart? And so, yeah, admittedly, we're propaganda, but so is everything else. And so let's realize that and go compete.
Exactly. Propaganda used to not be the dirty word that it became. And then I believe with Bernays, like, he became the father of public relations. Like, they changed the name so it didn't have the same.
More respectable.
Yeah, more respectable. But you're absolutely right. Everything is propaganda to a certain degree. And ultimately it comes down to what ideas make the most sense and teach those.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's a great chat between three propagandists right here.
You consider indoctrination. I see it the same thing. There certainly is the negative context of what we consider indoctrination, but ultimately it's teaching doctrine.
Yeah.
Which doctrine are we teaching? I'm amazed at how willing parents are to take their kids to Sunday school and to indoctrinate them religiously. And I mean that in a positive sense. I do it too. I was at church yesterday with the family, right? I am indoctrinating my children in what I believe to be true doctrine. And yet these parents, so few of them, will indoctrinate their children economically and politically and civically. They're reticent to teach them, here's what's true, or here's what's right, or here's what I believe. I think it ultimately stems from insecurity on the part of the parents, because they themselves don't know very well. They don't understand these ideas. They don't have a lot of convictions because they're the products of the public school system, and they never learned this stuff that well, so they can't. Which ultimately is why Tuttle Twins is like a crutch for parents, because it's like, hey, you don't need to be an expert in entrepreneurship. Just read this fun storybook with your kids, and you can have a conversation about it. And over half the parents who get our books tell us that they're learning new things for the first time. So I think it's just a sad indictment on our school system that so few adults are competent in and confident in their knowledge of these issues. But I guess it just means we got opportunity to grow and help people who are in that situation.
Yeah, man. Like, the way I try to put it into perspective for other parents is like, between kindergarten and year 12, you're handing your child's mind over to the government for 15,000 hours. 15,000 hours to be molded by strangers that are paid by the government. And you have no idea who they are.
Yep.
Yeah.
During their most intellectually formative years, no less.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh yeah, when you're 50, you're going to go through this, year. Like, no, it's during their most formative years. I saw this hilarious. I'm going to butcher this, but it was a Babylon Bee meme a year or two ago, and there was this. It was like this 18-year-old getting into his car, packed full of his belongings on the front street, and mom and dad are up at the house, standing on the porch, waving goodbye, and the caption says something like, local parents excited to send their children off to college to erase all of the values and ideas that they tried to encourage, or something like that, right? But it just shows that, like, there are, like you said, 15,000 hours in government schools. There are these people who are influencing our kids. Why aren't we trying to influence them as well? Again, I think a lot of that is insecurity. I think it's ignorance. And so I used to see Tuttle Twins as us making children's books. I now consider them family educational resources, because we're hitting up mom and dad as much as we are the kids. And we want them all singing from the same sheet of music. People used to say, oh, you're preaching to the choir. The people getting your books already believe these ideas. I said, the choir doesn't really get a lot of reinforcement. The choir's kids aren't joining the choir. They're abandoning the faith. They're not sitting in the pews. So we have to preach to the choir, and we have to help the choir go home and sing together with their kids. Otherwise, we're losing people from our ranks. And I'm sick of playing defense. At the end of the day, I want to go on the offense. I want to win. I don't want to get one step forward and 83 steps backwards. We have to have a more sustainable movement if we're going to be successful, and it starts with families.
I love it, man. Like, we have our own course ourselves, helping individuals develop self-esteem and self-good and individuality. And I think what you're doing really is nurturing self-esteem. Because when you think about, these principles, like even, basic understanding of economics, individualism, liberty, etc., these are all things which, help individuals to deal with the basic challenges of life. And when it boils down to it, Nathaniel Branden, the great psychologist himself, defined self-esteem as that, one's competence to deal with life. So to me, it's like school is where self-esteem goes to die, but it's these principles which actually nurture the seeds of feeling competent to deal with the reality that, life is okay, that, I have tools and skills and an understanding of what's happening around me to create something meaningful for myself, to lead a life of purpose without having to fear everything that I don't know, right? Because we're not taught how reality really operates.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. I agree.
So let me ask you this question, man. Like, what's your writing process like? Like, how does a book unfold?
Well,
right behind him.
yeah. For those of you watching the video, you can see my mind mapping. It's chaos. Well, I'll talk specifically to the Tuttle Twins. I've written about a dozen other books for general audiences and so forth, but the Tuttle Twins, I've got a long list of ideas that I want to talk about, that I want to write about, I should say. And so when it's time to write another book, it's just kind of reprioritizing. Like, what's the book that people need right now? Like, for those watching the video, this artwork on the wall next to me is one of Elijah's images from our book called The Tuttle Twins and the Leviathan Crisis. And all of our children's books are based off of classic books like The Law by Bostout that we were talking about. This book in particular, there's a book from the 80s called Crisis and Leviathan by Bob Higgs. He's an economist and a historian, and he talks in the book back in the 80s about what we mentioned a few minutes back, and that is, when there's a crisis, government never lets that go to waste. They always leverage the crisis and they exploit the fear to expand their power. And so he talks, for example, about World War II, how there were all these government bureaus of, planning the economy and wartime production and all these bureaus and divisions and everything else. And then he shows like the whole list, and he says, here's before the war. How many of them do you think actually were dissolved and disbanded after the war? Well, none of them were. They were just renamed, because now it was no longer wartime production. It was, Department of Economic Planning and Productivity, or whatever, right? So the government grew. That's the new baseline. And so in this image, we show all these different, like the market crash with the Great Depression, World War II, the war on drugs, 9/11, the banking crisis, healthcare, COVID, and all the rest. And Leviathan is growing and growing in response. The state is growing. So that book, I mention it because when COVID hit, and we saw again that, like, okay, here we go again. People are getting scared. The government's going to grow, spend all this money, blah, blah, blah. We said, oh, this is the book that we have to do right now. This is the book that is relevant to the time that we live in, and most pertinent to, what families need to be talking about and thinking about. So a lot of it is just that constant reprioritization. And as for the writing part, like, I'm a quick writer. And so once I've got kind of the idea fleshed out and I know what I want to do, I fly a lot, I'm traveling a lot. So I'm often writing on the plane, 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there, 45 minutes there. And so it's very incremental and iterative in nature. And it's very collaborative too. So Elijah, my illustrator, contributes a lot, and he'll, he's very like-minded and very well-informed. And so he's always saying, oh, what about this? Or change that, or consider this. So it's a kind of a team effort in that regard. But for me, and now that we've expanded, so like next in a few weeks, we've got this book coming out. This is volume 2 of our history book. It's a 250-page hardback book all about American history. And this covers from 1776 through 1791. And so it uses storytelling to teach about the principles of the Revolution and the Constitution. And so this book has taken us quite a while to work on. So we have these different like formats now. Like that big book is a really significant thing. Another format that we do is we have this series for teens called guidebooks. So we have like the Tuttle Twins Guide to Logical Fallacies, and every chapter is a different logical fallacy with cartoons and stuff to kind of depict how they work and basically teaching critical thinking. Or we have the Tuttle Twins Guide to Modern Villains, where I have that here, where every chapter is a different bad dude from history. And so we can learn about like how they rose to power, and therefore, like, so here's Mao. And so there's a chapter all about Mao, and it features the story of Mao's background and how he rose to power. And we just kind of explain for teens how that works, so that we can say, like, how can we make sure modern villains don't grow today, don't rise, to power today? What can we learn from their mistakes and their circumstances to avoid it? So the next one I'm working on right now, I was working on it this morning. We're doing a guidebook called the Tuttle Twins Guide to True Conspiracies. And every chapter is going to be like, MK Ultra, Operation Northwoods. I'm throwing in Hunter Biden's laptop,
Wow.
like all these things where, it's like, here are legit, actual, verifiable conspiracies. And why do we want kids learning this stuff? Teenagers, this one's for teenagers. Ultimately, it's because, like, are we so deluded to think that, oh yeah, sure, these things happened decades ago, but nothing like that is happening today? Our government would never lie. Like, no, of course not. And so if we can learn from the past that there were all these actual conspiracies and horrible things being planned, we can kind of maybe be a bit more skeptical of what we're being told today and realize that there may be similar psyops and conspiracies afoot today. So I'm excited for that book. I think that's gonna blow up when we publish it later this year.
I think it's amazing. And we got to reclaim the language too. It's like conspiracy is like this dirty word. How dare you even think about them and believe them? Like, this doesn't happen. And yet we see it all around us. It's been going on since the beginning of time. And so for children to be aware of this term and not to feel like, oh, wow, if someone calls me a conspiracy theorist, then I'm just going to shut down and not keep living my life as an empowered individual, instead of still fighting for truth, still fighting for, bringing more bringing more eyes and ears into some of these issues that people aren't going to get from the mainstream media. Like, you have to be able to read. You have to be able to, like, go beyond the first 5 things on a Google search if you want to find out the truth. Like, it's just not going to happen if you're just looking at your social media feed or listening to Anderson Cooper.
Well, it's true. And ultimately it stems from desire. Do people desire truth or not? And I feel like it's like the Jefferson quote, the calm of despotism. There's plenty of people who are fine to just live in the matrix, or who want to be reinserted into the matrix like Cypher was, right? Ignorance is bliss. There are many people who operate that way. I think it's far fewer in our society, people who are willing to seek after the tough answers, of life, to be red pilled, to deal with the struggle that I mean, I gotta tell you, as someone who considers himself pretty red pill and awake, like, it's tiring. I hate, having to assume that everyone's lying to me, and I hate questioning everything, and I hate second guessing everything. It is far more convenient to just go along with the narrative and just be led by the, whatever, led, by your shepherd, your false prophets, and so forth. And I think it's a lot more convenient. It is tiring to be awake, but I think we have to, and I think it's ultimately, like, because I desire truth, and that is the price of truth, is the uncomfortability of reality, and realizing the way things actually are, rather than the false narratives and the scales that have been put over our eyes, the false matrix that's constructed for so many people. And maybe a final thing there, just because I mentioned the Matrix, I consider not the original, not the sequels. The original, I consider it second to scripture in how accurate a depiction it is of, like, human society and human behavior. More specifically, the scene where Morpheus is walking Neo through kind of the simulation, talking about what the Matrix is. The woman in the red dress, and he says, look around at all these people. They represent the minds of the people, we're trying to liberate. And yet these people, he said, will fight you. They are so hopelessly dependent, so inured in the system, that they will fight you as you try to liberate them from it. And I've always found that so fascinating, because here I am running a think tank, fighting for freedom, trying to liberate people, trying to help them. And these people fight me when I know that the solutions we're pushing for and the things we're trying to do is ultimately better for them. And yet they are so trapped within this system that they can't see anything other than the false reality that's been constructed for them. It's depressing sometimes, man, to see how, like, plugged in people are, and how they'll fight you when you know that you have the truth, when you know that what you're standing for is right. But I am weird in the sense that I have, like, some DNA that just compels me to be awake and be in the fight and have thick skin to go press forward despite all of that, because ultimately for me, it's about the dopamine hits. When I get, like, emails from parents reading Tuttle Twins, or people whose business has been helped because of this law we got changed or whatever, and they're like, hey, thank you, it all goes back to me, to that 2007 polygamy fundamentalist thing, and being praised and shown gratitude for serving other people when they can't help themselves. And so that's kind of how I'm wired, is, like, I'm always chasing that dopamine hit of, like, how can I create value for other people? How can I positively impact other people? And then it's a win-win, where I get my little, drug fix from dopamine, and they get education or some legal reform. And so it's a win-win, I guess.
Incredible, man.
Yeah.
You're a legend, bro. I just love how real, how authentic you are, and, like, how you're so legitimate as well. Like, no one's gonna come around calling you, like, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. In the derogatory sense that many others are. So just love what you stand for, man. What kind of question
Thank
for
you.
you? Like, if you think, like, without the elite class, without the quote unquote propagandists of the world in the nefarious sense, do you think the mass of men would still prefer despotism without the conditioning, without the programming?
Well, this is a good question, and I don't want to demean it by giving some off the cuff answer. So I'm processing.
Because isn't it that inherent despotism within the masses that actually gives rise to the elite? Like, the master requires a willing slave, right?
I mean, ultimately, it's the chicken or the egg scenario, right? Which one produces the other one? Or is it this symbiotic relationship where they're both kind of naturally going to emerge in any human society?
Yeah. Like, have we always
I
been the
feel
minority
like,
throughout history? Like, even,
well, you guys are familiar with this concept of social proof, I imagine. This where we're heavily influenced by other people. One of the stories I love to share that illustrates this was from a Nickelodeon show, or no, National Geographic show called Brain Games years ago. And they set up this fake, like, optometrist clinic
Oh yeah.
on the side of the road. You seen this or heard about it? And they were offering free eye exams. This lady walks in, grabs the clipboard, starts filling it out, and there's this buzzer sound that goes off. And the gal next to her, sitting next to her, stands up and sits back down. She's like, that's kind of weird, and keeps filling out her form. Someone else comes in, gets their clipboard, sits down, buzzer goes off. The new person that just came in, as well as that other person, stand up, sit down. She's like, this is so odd. And so, it happens a couple more times, and people start getting called in to the point where she's the only one in the room. And the buzzer goes off, and she still stands up and sits down without having any knowledge as to why, no reason, like just the power of needing to act in and conform in ways with other people. So, Joel, I like your question. And I guess where I kind of tentatively land on it is I think we're so influenced by other people that even if there's not this top down, propaganda push onto us, I feel like the fact that like social proof is a real thing, the fact that we are likely to take our cues from other people, I feel like in a large society, these things are naturally going to emerge. And we're going to defer to people like, oh, you're the expert, I'll just listen to you. And now I don't have to do the thinking and the research. I'll just, listen to what you say. I mean, I get like when it's election time, I get all kinds of texts from people in my neighborhood who know that I'm all political and informed and so forth. And they'll just ask me straight up, who should I vote for? And I tell them because my vote turns into 28 votes because I get to control what other people do. So I'm going to capitalize on that. But that's depressing as hell to me that these people are not even willing to invest the time and energy to look into this stuff. So I feel like, again, big society, people are naturally going to take path of least resistance. They're going to be lazy. Experts are naturally going to emerge. They're going to defer to them. Social proof kicks in, and all of a sudden we've started where we were before. So yeah, sure, snap your fingers and get away with the propaganda, but I think it would just naturally reemerge. It's some weird function of human society. I don't know.
Well said, man.
Most people are subconsciously programmed to seek safety within the herd, and so they're looking out what's the safe card to play. And the zeitgeist, to some degree, of the times determines that. And you saw what happened in 2020. And people do conform. People want to go along to get along. And you bring up the brain games experiment, and many decades ago, Solomon Asch did his conformity experiment as well, which is, I think, maybe one of the precursors to these more modern ones. And people, even though deep down they think they have the right answer to a question, because everyone next to them is answering and picking the wrong answer, they'll go along and pick the wrong answer just so they don't feel ostracized by the group. Yeah. But when they did these experiments, if one other person gave the correct answer, they felt more confident to give the right answer, even if there were a few others that were, giving the wrong answer on purpose. So again, it's it's even more reason to speak your truth and live your life and live your life. You know what I mean? Like it's
well, and going back to the Cialdini book Influence and how we can use these tools in a positive way. I think about how can we leverage social proof and that type of behavior patterning, after other people in a positive way to get more people to do, what's right and what's good, rather than always assuming this kind of negative thing. There was this clip I saw a couple of years ago. I think it was recorded like 10 or 15 years ago. And it's this kid at some outdoor concert, and there's some kind of rock jazz band, something playing. And this kid is just out on all these people are sitting out on the grass, enjoying the music. And he's just up there like dancing, right? I mean, like full on dancing and with his vibe and his mojo and whatever. And like awkwardly so, right? Because everyone's kind of like, oh, like, look at this kid. He's just, and he's doing it for a while. And I don't know, 30, 40 seconds into it, someone just gets up and joins them. And now they got two people and they're goofing off, and then a third, and then 5 more, and then 15 more, and then 50 and 100 and 1,000. Pretty soon the entire place is up dancing. And it's just this spectacular video. I should try and find it and share it again. Like it's so amazing to see that this awkward kid had kind of the leadership and the ability to like stand up and stand out and stand for something, even as silly as just, letting loose and having a good time. But the influence he had was it was viral in the true sense of the term. So I try and think about like, how can we leverage those human dynamics, those social dynamics in a positive way? Because they're being leveraged in a negative way. We ought to compete. We ought to do something similar. What does that look like? And that to me is a fascinating question.
Yeah. And I think, like, again, coming back to individualism, to realize each one of us is a miracle. The fact that we were born, what does it take to be born? Just that alone. And that we are a fractal of the whole. We are a gift from God, whatever you want to say, whatever your belief is. And to know that you're this gift and that you have this purpose and you have these special things about you that you can cultivate and give your gift in the world. And I think the more each individual knows themselves, loves themselves, accepts themselves, and figures out what that thing is that they're meant to do. You had that one major rite of passage that led you on your journey, and every individual has those things. They have a calling, whether or not they answer the call or not, that's a whole nother question. But those that do, it's like you have a responsibility to give your gift. And when you do it from this place of joy and bliss, unapologetically, other people, you're living by example, and other people, you talk about impacting the social contagion in a positive way, that when you live as an individual truly and from a place of joy and authenticity, people, that's infectious. I find, at least some people might be triggered by that, but again, like, that's not on some level, that's not my problem. I'm going to live my life, and my tribe, the people that relate to me, are going to come to me and connect with me. And I think the more people do that, we're going to see change.
I think a lot of that stems down to being comfortable in your own skin, just as this awkward kid was dancing. Like, we have to be so comfortable with our own views and beliefs and desires that we can be open about them and risk being canceled, risk being attacked, risk being called a conspiracy theorist, risk being, fired or criticized or whatever. Like, again, Jefferson, the sea of liberty is tempestuous. It's not going to be easy. It was never intended to be such. Ships were made for the sea, not for the harbor, right? And so you can stay safe at the harbor all day long, but that's not why we make ships. And so to me, it's really a call for like having enough self-confidence. And what was the term, Joel, that you used? It wasn't self-confidence.
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem. Yeah. And developing that to the point where we can have the confidence to go out there and just be ourselves and shine that light, and it's going to radiate and impact other people positively, just as it did on this field at some random concert. I guarantee you over half of those people, if not way more, still have that as like a super positive, fun memory to look back on and just let loose and have a good time. What good can we do if we just stand? Like, I was a friggin' web developer that started an online petition. I had no idea. I still don't know what I'm doing. I run a think tank. We employ like 60, 70 people. I have no idea what we're doing. We make it up as we go. There's no manual for this. I'm a web developer running a big organization. I've written 40 books, sold millions of copies. I literally have no idea how to do this. And every day is just constantly rediscovering how to try and how to pivot and how to experiment and tweak. And so to me, it's like, if there's one good thing that happened during COVID, other than Tuttle Twins sales exploding, which was also a good thing, it's that the term expert is now out the window, right? Yeah. Because we were told experts say this, experts say that, experts recommend this, like over and over, crammed down our throats. And I feel like that word has really lost its power for a lot of people. You don't need to be an expert to do what you need to do, to go radiate and shine your light and stand up and impact other people. Again, I built websites for a living, and now I've changed hundreds of laws and written tons of books. Like, I have no formal background in this. I have no training for this. I didn't go to school for any of this. So like, especially when I talk to teens, I'm like, guys, like, getting a piece of paper that says that you can do work does not mean that you can do the work. And it doesn't mean that anyone will hire you to do the work. It just means that, congratulations, you sat in a chair for another 4 years and did what you were told. It's a different world. We need to be prepared for a future economy and a future society rather than one from 150 years ago. I don't know. I could go up on all kinds of tangents here, so I'll stop.
I love the tangents, man. I love it. I'm loving this conversation. I love your passion. I love who you are, man, because again, I knew a little bit about you. I knew your books more, and just to be able to have this conversation and connection with you, you're just a cool dude. You're deep, you're truthful, you're authentic, and I just have so much respect for you.
Yeah,
Thank
totally.
you. No, it's great to be able to come onto safe spaces like this to be able to talk openly about what I actually think.
But like we talk about and like we project and idolize onto like superheroes, but you think about like a Superman or or a Clark Kent or a Spider Man and a Peter Parker. Like it's very reminiscent of your own arc. I was just a web developer. And it's like all of a sudden, yeah, you answered the phone, you picked up the call, you put on the cape, and it's incredible how things shift. Like again, like echoing how we started this conversation.
Maybe let me add here a plug for something that I've really enjoyed because I can knock public schools all day long, and I'm very pro homeschool. But not a lot of families are willing to make that type of sacrifice and so forth. There's a school model, I guess you might call it, called Acton Academy. Have either of you guys heard of this before?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so Acton Academy, it's named after Lord Acton. He's the one that has the quote, "Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely." So Acton Academy was started by an entrepreneur out of Austin, Texas, named Jeff Sandifer and his wife Laura, and they created this school that is modeled after what's called the hero's journey, Joel, which is what I think you were kind of alluding to, whether consciously or not. And so the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, he wrote this book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces or something like that. And he shows that through all these epic tales, all these big stories and legends, they follow this formulaic pattern. And like, let's use the Matrix as an example, since we were talking about that. Neo, right, is called to this adventure. He's called to this this effort, but he feels very self-conscious and he has this self-doubt. Well, he has a mentor who shows up to show him the way. And so then he's surrounded by a team and off he goes to face the first challenge where he fails. And so he has to regroup and rebuild and then go try again and then overcome. And in the process, he's transforming himself so that he comes out the other end as this totally new creature. And then when he returns full circle, back home, he's a different person, on a different journey. You can take Frodo in Lord of the Rings, right? Same thing. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, same, and so the hero's journey is this very kind of almost formulaic process where these epic tales are all about human transformation. So this school, Acton Academy, they model their school after the hero's journey. So they call their students heroes. My kids, as of a year ago, we put them in a local Acton Academy because I found no other school that I would want to ever put my kids in other than this one. It's basically like how do you train entrepreneurs? Like how do you get people to be like holistic and well-rounded and all the rest? So the students are heroes. The teachers there are no teachers. The adults are guides, just like Morpheus or Gandalf or whatever. So they're there to guide you. You sit down at the beginning of the school year and you identify your journey. So I think the journeys are like 12 like semesters or trimesters or something. They call that a journey. And you sit down together with your parents and the guide and you identify what's the journey that you're going to go on. What's your call to adventure? What are your obstacles going to be? Who's the team that you can build around you to help you to overcome the obstacle and achieve success? How are you going to be transformed in the process? And it's this very kind of invigorating, self-affirming process to realize like we're not coddling these kids, we're not sitting them down, telling them to shut up and memorize and regurgitate stuff. It's like you are on your I think my kids are on their own journey of life, and they shouldn't be a mini me, or they shouldn't be an imprint of whatever some curriculum committee says that they should be or know or do. They're their own people. I'm a religious person. I think God has kind of predestined them in a way for having certain talents and skills and opportunities in life that are in front of them. I have no clue what that is. My job as a dad, I feel, is to help them figure out where the path is as soon as possible. For me, it wasn't until after college when I Googled Ron Paul and I started to figure out, oh, I need to be over here. This is my life trajectory, not building crap websites for random companies. I want to help my kids discover their path in life as soon as possible, and then help them build that team. Who's their mentor and who's their tribe and who can help them on that journey. It's a very affirming process. So these Acton Academies, they're all over the United States. They're in other countries. Like one of the biggest ones is in Guatemala. And it's just an amazing model for a lot of kids to give them that self-empowerment of saying, oh, I get to kind of control my own education process. I get to have a say in what I'm going to learn and do, and get help from people along the way. It's a great model worth looking into for those who are curious.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm going to look into it for sure.
I'm going back to school, bro.
Yeah, totally. I want to go on a little hero's journey. I identify as a 7-year-old.
What faith do you still have in the political system?
None. So I see because I mean, that sounds silly for someone who's engaged in politics like I am on a daily basis. I view my political involvement as akin to being on the deck chair of the Titanic. I don't think we can change the direction of the Titanic. I don't think we can change the inevitability of the crash. I think there are, calamitous times ahead and big challenges as a society. And I don't think we're going to get away from, economic turmoil and all these problems. So I feel like my role through the political process is really waking people up on the Titanic and getting them off to the lifeboats, right? Like reaching as many people as possible through whatever means I can, and helping them see, like, guys, there's bad things afoot. You need to prepare. You need to get your family's affairs in order. You need to get your finances straight. You need to develop additional streams of revenue. You need all these things. So to me, like, yeah, we're changing laws, but again, I feel like it's band-aids on gangrenous wounds. We've got to treat the underlying disease, and that's all education. It's getting people to wake up, take the red pill, and act accordingly. So I don't have a lot of faith. It's like social media. I would quit tomorrow if I could.
Yeah.
I would love to not be on social media, but I feel compelled to, because that's where the people are.
Yeah.
And my job is to reach and teach people. And so I have to engage in that process. I feel dirty every day doing it, but it's, part of the calling, as it were. And so I think it's that way with politics as well. To me, it's a means to an end. It's a vehicle through which I can reach and persuade and educate people. And it's been effective in the past. We do some good along the way, but I recognize that, again, for every step forward we take, we're taking a bunch of steps back. And I don't have a lot of hope in the political process. I think it just leads to tribalism. And like, we just did a Tuttle Twins cartoon the other day, last week, all about tribalism. And George Washington, in his farewell address, he's already seeing in his own cabinet this devolution of kind of the like spirit of unity and coming together and brotherhood. And because during the revolution, they were all on the same side, and that was convenient because they were united by a common enemy. But when they had to figure out how to govern themselves, all of a sudden, you got Hamilton over here wanting a bank already, trying to turn us into a monarchy again, and there are all these competing ideas. So Washington, in his farewell address, warns of the spirit of party, and its kind of toxic effects on the political process, young as it was at the time. So I think it brings out the worst in us. I think it encourages tribalism. I think it doesn't encourage collaboration and unity. It's a race to the bottom. People, it's like hungry hippo, right? Here's these scarce resources, and we're just like, gimme, and it's just I don't know. It's no good. But some of us have to be there, engaged in that fight. Some of us have to at least be a voice of reason in a room full of chaos, and such is my calling and my team for now. And we do some good, but again, from a meta perspective, like, there are big fish to fry, and this is just a fraction of what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Have you read Atlas Shrugged?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
That was one of our Tuttle Twins. We turned it into the Tuttle Twins and the Search for Atlas.
Oh, yeah,
so
you did.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we have a children's version all about, the importance of being able to keep what you earn, not having other people steal from you, the dangers of socialism and central planning and mooching, what Ayn Rand called mooching.
Yep.
Taking from other people something that you had not worked for. So yeah, it's been a while since I read the full book, but I go back every once in a while and read, like, some of the little diatribes, the the money speech and things like that. Yeah.
Man, the money speech is next level.
That's just incredible.
Yeah, for sure. I often say I think I read this once in a YouTube comment, but I claimed it as my own. My life's in two phases, before and after Atlas Shrugged.
It's that way for a lot of people. And, I think of it this way. If you were to stop the average guy on the road, on the street, and say, "Hey, here's this book." We'll use Atlas Shrugged as the example. You should read this book. He's going to look at how thick the book is.
Yeah.
He's going to look at this was written decades ago when they would use like multiple syllables in a word rather than like simple language. There's no pictures in it, and complex ideas. And let me throw the question to you before I continue. What percentage of people that you stop on the street and gave a free copy of Atlas Shrugged to, what percentage do you think would actually accept it and read it?
0.01.
Less than 1%.
You guys are very very bearish on this, but I agree with you. I think sub 1%. But if you take that same individual and say, "Hey, do you think it's important for your kids to learn about personal responsibility and entrepreneurship and hard work and creating value for others or whatever?" Right? I think like everyone would say yes. And so then I say, "Okay, here's a storybook where you can read that with your kids and you can learn together." Suddenly for that dad or that mom, the defenses come down, right? Mm-hmm. Because before it's like, "Oh no, I got no time for that. I don't need that. I'm smart already. What are you saying? I'm an idiot? What are you saying, that I'm deficient somehow? Like, I got no time. I'm worried about all these other things." But when it's about their kids, like I watch Shark Tank all the time. I'm a religious watcher of Shark Tank. And when the entrepreneurs are in there pitching, if it's a product that has to do with kids or pets, Mark Cuban will very often comment to the fact that those are the two categories where people will spend indiscriminate amounts of money. Like they're irrational when it comes to their children and their pets. They're very willing to invest and spend money on behalf of kids and pets, but not themselves. And they're much more, reticent to part with their money when it comes to investing in themselves. So that's why I think that the Tuttle Twins work can be so impactful, is because in a sense, it's a little devious. It's about saying, "Hey, get this book for your kids, teach your kids these ideas. You want to be a good parent and make sure that your children are well-rounded." But in the process, the parents' barriers are down. They're reading together with their kid, and which is why a lot of them are learning new things for the first time, because they're in a situation where they're open to learning.
Yeah.
I mean, our dog eats better than most humans, so I totally get what you're saying.
Connor, man, incredibly inspiring. Thank you for this amazing discussion over the past 90 minutes. You're doing incredible work. You're creating incredible value. You're impacting, so many lives in such a positive way. Just in closing, where would you like to direct our audience? And if you have a final statement, feel free.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've enjoyed the discussion. Thanks for the safe space, and we'll see if I get any flack for it from openly sharing my views from anyone who listens, which is always the fun part, is seeing the reaction.
Won't be from our audience.
Yeah. So anything Tuttle Twins, you're going to want to go to TuttleTwins.com. We've got books from toddlers to teens and everything in between, teaching these ideas. So if you've enjoyed what we've talked about and you've got kids or grandkids in your life or nieces and nephews, birthdays coming up, or you want them to be reading something meaningful during the summer and not just fritter their time away, we've got a bunch of book bundles that you can get where we've got bonuses and discounts and all kinds of stuff. So TuttleTwins.com is where it's at for that. I've mentioned some of the other books that I've written and worked on. So just go to Amazon, type in Connor Boyack. You'll find some of my other books there. You can go to ConnorBoyack.com and learn a little bit more about me there.
Yeah, we'll have all of the links in the show notes. And for everyone listening, I recommend getting the Tuttle Twins books. They're incredible. They're awesome. You'll learn a lot. Your kids, your nephew, your grandchildren, they'll all learn plenty. So definitely support Connor and his work. Really appreciate you, man.
For sure.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care. Guys, thanks so much for listening. That episode blew my mind. Didn't know what to expect getting Connor on here, but, straight fire, very unexpected. But he's a man on a mission, and I love everything he stands for and everything that he's about. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Just quickly, if you are interested in joining the next cohort of students for our 8-week transformational program for truth seekers, Rise Above the Herd, spots are filling up. You can learn more and apply at riseabovetheherd.co. Once you do so, you'll be invited to join Yerasimos and myself for a no obligation connection call so you can learn even more about the program. Much love to you guys. You're the foundation of what we do here. None of this is possible without your listenership. We appreciate it. If you get the chance, please rate, review, subscribe wherever you're consuming this. Till next time.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean, fast forward in evolution to a place where we can share our confusions. Yeah, 450 BC, I'm sharing tea with confusion.